Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
First of all, thank you for coming out on a warm night, which I'm really excited about. Hello to everybody joining us on Facebook. We do know that the screen's a little brighter than we like, but we don't have any way to adjust exposure on the live stream. But when the talk is done, we're going to take the footage, edit it, put the slides in, and put that on YouTube. So we'll share that link on our Facebook page. Hi, Mom. In Florida. I think we all know why we're here. We're going to talk about Port Henry's film history, specifically the years from about 1910 through around 1925, the silent era. Yes, Ronnie?
Can we turn off the music?
Oh, of course we can. Why don't we just do that? Thank you. I knew I'd forget something.
Just one for you. Yeah.
So if you don't know me, my name is Kris Jarrett. I'm proud to be the director here at Sherman Free Library. And I realized when we were doing our last talk with Joan and John that I haven't actually given a presentation here in the last couple of years, so it's time to do that. And this topic kept coming back to the front of my mind. I love researching the tiny little topics that we don't know much about. It's slightly selfish because if you find one piece of new information, you've added 20% to our knowledge, so it's really easy to make discoveries. But this is a topic that interests me because I do like old films, and it seemed like a topic where we all had lots of bits and pieces of information that were scattered. And my goal with this project is not only to put this presentation together, but to consolidate all of that information that's out in the world, bring those bits and pieces and clues into a cohesive file to tell the story, right? Little bits and pieces of news clippings and information on their own don't really tell us that story about the people, the art that was being made here, and that's my goal. One of the nice things about this being a library for the public is that all of this information is available to everyone. Just shoot me an email or come on in. I'm more than happy to talk for more than the hour that we're going to talk tonight if you're interested. But we want to make that a public document that we can keep adding to, and I'll talk more about the final pieces of this project at the end. But it's a super interesting topic, and again, is not something we know a whole lot about. So it's nice to put some of those pieces back together. This is my first time doing this particular talk, so bear with me if I do read something occasionally, but we'll get through it. So all this information will be available. Because of that, we're not necessarily going to read all of the synopsises of the films. But we're also going to put all the slides on YouTube, so if you want to read those in detail, you can certainly do so by playing and pausing that video, or just come on in and I'll give you a copy. So first and foremost, I have done a little bit of unique original research for this presentation, but I am really standing on the backs of the experts that have worked on it before me. And that's all of these folks and many more, but specifically thank you to Betty at the Historical Society and Joan Davey for providing her research material that had been put together over the prior couple of decades. And all the resources are here and available if anybody wants to read more on your own. Format for tonight, I'm going to try to keep it to an hour. Hold me to that. Somebody start throwing things at me at an hour. But I'm going to try to structure this in a bit of a storyline of why, how did we end up here, who's doing this work, where they're doing it, which is where some of the new information might come in, and then what they were doing. So why? What's the history that brings us to this point? Why did we land in Port Henry to make films? It starts in the pre-film days. Everyone's probably familiar with the Lee-Walled Opera House that was here in town. Every major town back in the day had some kind of an opera house. And it really was a spectrum of what you could go to see there, from very, what we would call today, family-friendly entertainment, on through some vaudeville that probably wasn't very family-friendly. One of the stars of that time is, in some ways, a local girl, the queen of vaudeville, Eva Tangay. Anybody know that name? Ring a bell? Anybody? The I Don't Care girl. That was her big hit. You may recognize that as being covered later on in the sort of dance movies of the 40s. But she was quite a pistol. There's some oddness in the records as to where she was born, but we know that at least her mother is buried up the road in Keysville. And it's likely that she may have been born there, and there was some weirdness with immigration and borders and things like that, where they didn't quite be necessarily honest about where they were from. But she was one of the big stars, and we're going to skip past her because she's going to be another talk. So technically, we'll come back to Eva another day. She's a whole story on her own. She was famously known for not taking any guff from the guys backstage. She was brought up on charges twice, once for kicking a gentleman down the stage stairs, and another time for stabbing someone with a hairpin when they got too fresh backstage. So technically, how do I find ourselves here? Humans understood the physics of optics and how that's going to eventually play into cameras very early on. This is the camera obscura, or a basic pinhole room. You put a small hole in a wall, it acts like a lens and projects a copy of what's outside on the wall. You can still make these today. People use them for artwork and drawing and things. So we kind of knew what we had to do. We were able to make things like magic lanterns. This is a glass slide, either painted artwork or later on photographs that were printed on glass and then projected. And you would generally have musical accompaniment and a story. You might note that this slide is in upside down, in that it's in right side up. The camera's going to flip it, so that museum needs to fix their display. Here is the Leewald Opera House. Fortunately, no longer with us after a fire. But as time progresses, as we move towards the beginning of the 20th century, the 1900s, a lot of these opera houses are converted to show films. Everybody recognizes that guy. But as we start to figure out photography and then eventually moving pictures, which is really not much more than showing a photograph 29.9 or 30 times a second, the eye starts to see that as movement. But the problem is, what do you put that photograph on? Early photographs are going to be put on glass. A little bit later, they're going to be put on tin. That's real hard to move at 29.9 frames a second in front of the light source. So what we're going to talk about tonight is kind of down in this time period, when we're figuring out how to put film or put moving pictures on film, but before we figured out how to sync that to sound. And speaking of, we still have to do that with modern video equipment and audio equipment to sync the sound to the video. That's what that clapboard is for. And I forgot to do that when I set up the camera. So what are we going to put our photograph on? Kodak Eastman over in Western New York develops the very first flexible medium to be able to put your photographic emulsion on. So basically you've got this slurry of silver and chemicals, and you coat some type of a surface that's sensitive to the light. You wash off whatever is not exposed, you fix it, you end up with a photograph. But they came up with this nitrocellulite film. Nitrocellulite film. And that's great, but also turns out that it's one of the components of gunpowder. The nitro film carries with it its own oxidizer, so it can actually spontaneously combust. It also just eats itself. This is early film just sitting in storage. It oxidizes and it breaks down into this goopy slurry that eventually catches fire. Looks like that. And of course, this leads to some tragedies. This is a film still. Don't worry, nobody was harmed in the making of this slide. In retrofitting those early opera houses, they basically would build a bunker in the projection room. This is an advertisement for an early retrofit. We have a sealed door, which you want for light leak anyway, but you also have this big steel fireproof door that can slam down over the projection window. There are, as it clearly advertises here, 5 fire control points in the room that you can pull to lock down the room, because you have this flammable film running in front of a hot lighting element, and they did combust quite frequently. It was pretty dangerous stuff to work with. And it happened right here in town. The Empire Theater, which was located just kitty corner to the library, next to the bank where the current assessor's office was. This newspaper article tells us of a fire that happened there in 1930. And they were luckily able to put it out with only some damage to the projector. But it did happen. No one was harmed in this one, as far as the article tells us. Now, as we start to move forward into the era of talkies, or films with sound, it's really complex. It's just not an easy thing. The same problem you have with putting a photograph onto medium, we have with sound. We knew how to record sound well back in the 19th century, and people like Edison are working to figure out what can we put that on. But you're starting with things like wax, and it just doesn't hold up to repeated playing. And then you also have the idea that you need to sync that to the film. Well, the film's not moving at a terribly regular speed. The sound on a record is not moving at a terribly regular speed. It's still a problem today. It's one of the hardest things of getting film rights into good audio. But this is a very early, I believe this is an Edison Vitaphone, where they're syncing this early film to record players, believe it or not. But it took a while. And in the interim, we have this era of silent films. And I put this little article up just because of their quotations around the word movie. That struck me as interesting. We're developing new terms that didn't exist before. Movie as an object, as a noun rather than something moving, and also location as a new term in quotes. Thought that was fun. As you start to look at the people in these films, you might think, boy, they look like corpses. There's a reason for that. This early film is very sensitive to the blue spectrum. It's not terribly sensitive to the red or warmer colors, which humans, at least the skin tones of people they're putting in these films early on, tend to be on the lighter, more pinkish coloring. So this is a pretty good representation of what their makeup would have looked like. These early films are also not terribly sensitive to light, so you need to absolutely blast your actors with light. You need to compensate for that with very thick oil makeup, and the colors that they're using are very intentional. If they didn't do this kind of bluish around the eyes, very dark eyeshadow, everyone would just look like they had black sunken eyes. So this is that makeup in color, and then as it appears on screen. So it does give a very specific look that would last right on through about 1950, when we had plastic film that didn't have quite those problems. So who are we talking about? Who are the characters in our story? We're just going to cover a few major folks today that were big players, and we're going to start with, in my opinion, the most important of all. William Caribou Bill Cooper. This guy is great. He is starting his career at the time when there's this new idea of being a media celebrity. People like Wild Bill Hickok, Annie Oakley, Mark Twain, to some extent, are building characters to make a career for themselves, but they're utilizing the newspapers. They're utilizing the fact that you can drop a letter in from the Arctic and send it to a newspaper in New York, and they'll print it. If you look at newspapers of this time period, they're not full of photographs. They're full of text. And a newspaper editor loves nothing more than getting a letter in the mail that they can just throw onto the lead and fill column inches, because they have a lot of column inches to fill. So he would like you to think that he was born up in the Arctic to an Eskimo family. If I use that term, it's the one he's using. But he was not. He was born in Rochester, New York in 1872. No evidence that he had any native ancestry, but that's another story. He was a dog musher, so he finds himself out on the northern west coast and up into Canada and Alaska, starting about 1895, and he is carrying mail by dog sled. He's doing that first for the Canadian government and then for the United States government for about 20 years. And one of his trips is about a 1,000-mile round trip. So he's definitely getting his experience in running dogs. And then we start to see this explosion of contests, usually sponsored by newspapers because they want the content. Again, they are the YouTube of their day. And he looks at this and says, oh goodness, this race is only 430 miles. I do that before lunch. Let's do it. and he wins the first, I don't know if you call them races, they're more like challenges. Think of like the X Prize that we had a couple of years ago for space exploration. And he does very, very well. And then he's offered $10,000 as a prize if he can take sled dogs around the world. He gathers up his supplies. In fact, this is a photograph from one of his trips where he's buying supplies out in Alaska, or Seattle, Washington. And he's going to set off across North America. There's got to be a boat in there somehow. I'm not sure how he's going to do that with the dogs. But the idea is he's going to circumnavigate the globe and end up back on the West Coast. He makes it to New York City. Not too bad, across the whole continent. He makes it to New York City. Doesn't seem like he's going to be successful going around the world, but people start to notice him and go, boy, you're a weird guy. You should be in pictures. And so he decides, all right, I'm going to start making some movies. I don't know what background he might have had in film or photography, but anyway, he makes his way up to this area and lands first in about 1910 in Saranac Lake. He sets up a movie studio on Edgewood Road, calls it the Eskimo Village, and he starts making movies. Now, these are the very early days, 1910 to about 1915. So in that time, we think he made about 10 feature films. A reel of film is about 15 minutes, so he was probably making single reel films, very quick and dirty. But it's early days, nobody knows any better, right? We haven't seen Gone in the Wind yet. We've seen these short little experimental pieces. These are some photographs of his village that he sets up in Saranac Lake. I believe he lived there. I don't see any evidence that he lived somewhere else during that time. And eventually he decides, well, let's go see what Port Henry's like. So in 1915, the story goes, drives his sled dogs into Port Henry. I just picture him stepping off. All right, I'm here. And he leases from, I believe, Witherby and Sherman, the plot of land that would become Arctic City. I'm referring to that chunk of land as the village, Arctic City Village, because as we'll get to, they had more than one location. He makes his way down here to Port Henry. He sets up what would become the village of Arctic City, and he starts making a few more movies up there. And he would do that until about 1918. It's a little fuzzy exactly when he left. But he sold his interest in the studio, turned over the lease, headed out towards the West Coast again. He did a quick stint in Plattsburgh to see if he could get a movie studio going up there. I think it was a little too people-y for him, and he headed back out to the Northwest. He would pass away at the age of 61 from tuberculosis in the sanitarium in Washington.
Location of Arctic City?
We're going to get to that.
Oh, okay.
I got new information about that.
Really?
Not really new information, but more information. Here is his obituary, and to the very end, a storyteller. Whether he actually knew Jack London or not, I don't know. But if you read his obituary, he was good friends with Jack. Next person to come into our story is Charles Miller, and he is a director and is going to become one of the big moguls in the early film industry. One of the reasons, so he comes into town right around the same time, 1917, 1918. This is a later article, but I put this up here just to show he's having a big impact on the town. Yes, there's mining operations, there's industry happening, but some of that's starting to wind down by the 20s. And so a place like the Lee House with 50 guest rooms, this guy comes in and he can reliably fill that hotel with not just overnight guests, but with people who are going to stay there for some length of time and whose bill is going to be paid by somebody else. So you know they're good for it. So from everything I read, he was beloved in town. Seems like a pretty decent guy, and people, I think, liked him, not just for the economic benefit that he brought to town. He was born in 1857 in Michigan. There's not a lot of biographical information easily available for him, but he did start out his career as an actor on stage, and then would move into the silent film era. He didn't really work much past that. He did pass away in 1936, so he wouldn't have had much opportunity, but his list of credits for silent films is longer than I am tall, so quite a prolific career. One of the really sort of heartwarming stories, but also with a commercial twist, He was filming one of the films here, Law of the Yukon, I believe, and he needed a big Christmas scene. So he thought, well, what better way to do that than to just do it? So he put out word that Santa Claus was going to be on the bandstand right at Main and Broad, and come on down and get a present from Santa. And he had carolers and everything else. And of course, it meant that he could film that scene for his film, probably without having to pay all of those kids as extras. They were there to get the Christmas presents. And I was absolutely thrilled to see in Joan's work a photograph of that scene. So this is the bandstand. You're looking up Broad Street. We've got all of the kids and the Christmas tree. And as this newspaper article indicates, it was dubbed the Charles Miller Christmas tree. So to this day, if we wanted to, I suppose we could call it the Charles Miller Memorial Christmas tree. And this is what's printed on that sign out in front of the bandstand. And the newspaper articles following were just glowing. What a wonderful addition to our community. Now this is where the research gets a little murky, so I'm just going to skim through this very quickly so you don't see the holes in my timeline. Who are the financiers of these operations? In 1918, this trio of gentlemen enter the picture. Mostly, it seems, behind the scenes. They were the money people. George Shook, Mr. Gilio, that I do not have a first name for, I'm still looking for, and Mr. Deary. So this is Charles V. Deary, owner of the aforementioned Empire Theater. So he has a real direct interest in making sure that the movie industry takes off. And they purchased the whole operation from Caribou Bill when he heads out back west. This guy's name you will see pop up in the research, William Griffin. His name is often in the research materials conflated with William Cooper, and their names are mixed together. They're not. They're two entirely separate folks. He was a financier out of Albany. The records show that he purchased the property, but then his name disappears. So I wonder if that deal didn't fall through. That'll be a theme in here. The newspapers tended to run with sales very quickly before the ink was dry. But it does look like he at least had some kind of interest, and they start taking it public. By May of 1919, shares are available to the public to purchase and invest in the company. They claim to have $100,000 in prior investments. They started selling stocks at $100 a share. They ended up selling them at $20 a share.
Beer garden.
Yeah, isn't that cool? I just stuck that in there because it was cool and I know nothing else about it. That's something that popped up on the Facebook group at one point. Apparently there was a beer garden up near Arctic City. That's all I know about it. There's nothing else in the records that it would find. So long and short of it is ownership switches back and forth between a whole bunch of people relatively rapidly. What makes this complicated is that there's not just the owner of the physical property, there's the lessees of the physical property, and then there's the production companies that come in, and often the production companies are hired by a studio. So it's 3, 4, 5, 6 layers deep of people. But at some point, around 1924, it looks like Charles Deary is the last financier involved, and he sells to an Italian film company. We're starting to see the very early beginnings of spaghetti westerns, right? Italy's a great place to film and make it look like the west of the United States, so a lot of production seems to be moving over there. In 1926, the village, as it was up on Broad Street, is demolished or removed. Just to give some little idea of the complexity, these are all of the names of different film companies that were involved here that I've come up with so far, and that list grows every day. This is one of those stock certificates, which is held down at the Historical Society. This is one of the later ones, so it's $20 a share and 2 shares, but still $40 back then is not small change. And this is another certificate to the same thing.
Joe Gilbo.
Yeah. I've selected to talk about one of the film stars of the era because she spent a lot of time here, ended up with some connections in the community, and that is Pearl White. She's cool. Pearl was a cool lady. She liked cars. She liked driving fast, which would be useful in her career. She was born in 1889 in Missouri to a rural farm family. That wasn't going to be for her. She got into acting very, very young, about age 5 or 6. She was working on the stage. Interesting that she took the role of Eva, harkening back to Eva Tengay. But she would start on the stage. By her early teens, she was doing bareback stunt riding in circuses. She worked under the name Miss May Z and toured all around South America, even into Cuba, doing a stage vaudeville style singing show. That singing career damaged her voice to the point where she was going to have to retire, and then somebody came along and said, "Hey, we're making silent film." She said, "What'd you say, silent?" I like that idea. And she transitioned into the movie industry, partly because of that injury to her voice. She would unfortunately, while filming the shorts that we'll talk about in a bit, Perils of Pauline, here in some in Port Henry, Saranac Lake, and specifically in Osable Chasm, where they filmed a lot of the stunt work, she suffered a back injury, and that would plague her for the rest of her life, leading to some substance abuse, which would eventually cause her death just shy of 50 in France. She did get to move to Paris, so. This is one of her cars. This is a 1915 Stutz Bearcat Roadster in yellow. So I think she was an interesting lady to hang out with. She was known to imbibe and was quite the life of the parties at Lee House, so the story goes. This is a new era of the starlet, of the Hollywood star. And you see things like these are cigarette cards and first trading cards. She would also appear on just about every magazine cover possible. More cigarette cards. I think this has to be a still photograph in promotion of one of the films made up here. I think that's a painted backdrop. They've got her teetering in a horrible canoe. She's going to break the ribs on it. But, newspaper clipping after newspaper clipping after newspaper clipping saying that she's in town, or she's coming to town, or she's just left town, and how wonderful is this. So it was a real big deal to have a star. This would be like, I'm trying to think of a non-problematic movie star. Like Tom Hanks is spending a week in the Lee House. You know, this was a big star around town, and still a fairly small community. So you would see her, people would see her coming into the store to buy groceries or whatever, often to a bit of a shock because she was not a natural blonde. That was a wig. And so she's walking around town without her wig on. Has anyone heard the story of Pearl White and the flu? Good, I will not destroy your illusions too much tonight. There is a story out there that as the flu, which of course is devastating during these few years, has reached Keene Valley, and upwards of 85-90% of the population are sick with flu. Just a side bit of info, of everyone killed in Essex County in World War I, more than half died from influenza, rather than more injuries. So the story goes that she sends a telegram up to Keene Valley and says, "I'm here to help. What do you need?" And then she loads up her dog sled. It's a terrible blizzard. The roads are impassable. She puts a bunch of medicine on the dog sled. Stop me if you've heard this story, because it really did happen up north. She piles it full of supplies, makes the heroic journey into Keene, and saves the day. This is a wonderful letter to the editor a few days later, saying, "Come on, guys, how stupid do you think we are?" It seems that her press agent ran with this story, turned it into a big sensational thing, how she saved the day, and this is a local gentleman writing in saying, "You know what, we have this doctor, and this doctor, and this doctor, cadre of named nurses, and we're fine." What it looks like happened, she did get a telegram back saying, you know what, it's pretty much over. By that time, it was on the rebound, everything was starting to do better. But what she did do was a benefit concert at the Empire Theater and raised money that she's then sent to help out King Valley. Special guest stars, the people of Port Henry. Now, of course, you come into town to make a movie, you're going to bring a lot of your specialists with you, your camera people, your grips, your lighting people, but you're not necessarily going to bring a whole group of extras way up here. You're going to hire local folk. And you're going to hire local tradesmen and tradespeople to do the jobs that you need. And here are some, you probably will recognize some names.
Oh, yeah. Joe?
Apparently, Joe was quite the early aviator. That might be another talk. And he was hired to set up, I think, 2 airplane engines on concrete mounts up at the village. And then the local children were hired to be given grain shovels and throw snow in front of these wildly spinning propeller blades to make a blizzard as needed. One of the things that might still be out at the site are those concrete pillars. Would be good for helping to identify the location. It's not good to watch you found. Will Dobson was a horse wrangler. Mr. Bushman apparently was quite the horse wrangler himself, with some noted. Yep, Dr. Avery Sr. Yep. Electricians, you know, you need people. You're using a lot of electricity, you need a lot of light. And so you would have hired local folks, and apparently it's uphill both ways. This young gentleman, anybody that recognizes Willie McManus? The name? McManus family. I guess he spiraled his career off from wrangling horses at Arctic City into a career as a jockey. The gentleman on the left is Charles Abar, an extra. This is supposed to be a robbery scene. They look awfully happy. So where is this all happening? I've mentioned the village site so far, but we've got a couple of other locations. We'll start at the village, because that's the most famous. This is a promotional piece of artwork. Probably a touch exaggerated, but not too much. This is a nice photograph during summertime. We can see some of the buildings. Up there at the site, this of course varies as time goes on and the sets are changed for different films, but 30 to 40 cabins, one year-round building, which I've identified in the photographs and may have had electricity and lights and been a bit of an indoor filming site, but this is primarily an outdoor location type of a set. They're real buildings, but they're not real good buildings. And also horses. Of course, we know we're going to have about a dozen. Of course, it's fluctuated. A team or multiple teams of sled dogs. That's enough for at least 2 teams. And a trained bear.
Of course.
I know nothing more about the bear. I want to know the bear's name. This is a great photograph looking down Main Street. This structure right here is what I believe may have been used for some indoor filming. So it probably had electricity, or at least they were using generators of some kind. Another nice photograph. Hill in the back here, which I guess became a sledding, tobogganing hill later on for local kids. So key dates for the village, of course, Caribou Bill arrives in 15, starts construction. In September of 1915, I think to garner favor with the local community, he opened up the site for a dinner, a clam bake, hopefully arriving by train. They had clams, chickens, oysters, lobster, fish, clam sausage, that's a new one for me, I should try it, corn, sweet and Irish potatoes. Not sure the distinction there, and in large capital letters in the advertisement, refreshments. They were getting loaded up there. And by 1916, he had already put out about 10 films, so very rapid fire production happening there, low budget stuff. I mentioned the sledding hill because this showed up in the newspaper in 23. young lady named Margaret Hickey apparently broke her leg while tobogganing up there. We put everything in the local paper back in the day. It's good for historians. And this operated until 26, when Reverend George Woodall apparently bought the buildings, took them down for the lumber, and used them to construct the Woodall camp on Lake Champlain that I understand exists today. I'm not familiar with that property, but if you're looking for lumber that came from Arctic City, it's in that camp now. And then we get into the end of the 1920s, 26, until the stock market crash. Things are shifting out towards Hollywood. Couple of reasons for that. It's real hard to make movies here, it turns out. And also when you start thinking about putting sound into films, suddenly you're not filming outside anymore because you're not interested in just the imagery. You have to have a sound stage. You have to have somewhere that is isolated so that you can get that clean audio. In March of '55, we see that there was a cave-in, which is helpful for me because I can kind of tell where the road is going in there now because of that. A 20-foot by, or a 20-foot deep by 30-foot wide sinkhole apparently opened up just behind the restaurant that's next to the road that's in front of the village site. Some great photographs of the dogs. The dogs and the sleds and lots of unidentified folks. And of course, these buildings were changed, the facades were changed to match the needs of the film. Here we are, 1916, very gold rush era looking building. That's what they were filming here. Mostly Arctic exploration, Arctic adventure, Jack London stories, and gold rush stories. So what's left there today? I can't do a talk like this without talking about a little archaeology. So this is where people can help me out. Everyone I've spoken to has told me it's right about there. So this is the golf course on the other side of the road. This is a flood basin. This is Mill Brook here. So this is an overfill or overflow flood basin. And I believe that we're looking at this spot right here. Does that sound reasonably right? I'm getting good enthusiastic nods. Excellent. Then I'm not too far off, and this is the site today. So I took the liberty of pulling up the LiDAR for this area. Don't ask me what that acronym means, but the first part is laser. Airplane flies over, shoots high-powered lasers down at the ground. Those lasers do not care about foliage. So this is the road. This is Mill Brook. And this, I believe, is the site.
Yes.
So that is definitely disturbed ground. Honestly, I didn't expect much looking at this because these are all temporary buildings, maybe sitting on some field stones, but there are no foundations. LiDAR is really good at finding wall lines and foundations, but that many people, that many dogs, and a bear trampling the ground for a couple decades, and you get a pattern that looks like this. So I think we can actually see some small cabin sites. This may be the road going down in.
I thought that was floodplain.
Well, it is. If it's flooded, there's still some compacted ground that we can see. It's also this is a nice deep channel now. It's possible it's just a non-active flood basin at this point.
When I was a kid, I went down in there
Yeah.
100 years ago, and you could see some of the ruins.
Okay.
Maybe a log sticking up that
Yep.
was
Yep.
part of a log cabin type thing.
Sure. This is going to be helpful. I would love to get down in there. I'm not sure who the current property owners are. It may well be National Grid. So see if we could get access. But these are the sinkholes that you see around here, where less sinkhole, more just collapsing. So this area, it's going to be a little hard to disorient you to see, but this is lower ground than up here.
That big sink is right at the Hilltop store.
Okay.
You can walk out in their driveway, walk right straight across. That's
Right there. Okay. Yeah. I need to do a site visit. I need to see if I can get permission to go out there. It'd be fun to just see if there's anything left from this little temporary village. Second location. So this was new information to me. I'm sure some folks remember or knew about it, but when they realized that, boy, this really isn't great for business to be sitting here waiting for it to snow, maybe we should be able to film inside in town as well. And they made that happen with the old shirt factory, AKA Studio Hall. So the shirt factory was originally constructed in the 19th century. They employed mostly young ladies to work in essentially textile sweat mill type conditions. And it wasn't so terrible up here, but this is the time when we're putting people into mills in not so savory conditions. The shirt factory was located, just to orient ourselves, this is Christchurch Episcopal. So this is college, where library is just over here. And the shirt factory was located somewhere in this area. I have not been out there to look for wall lines, but there's a big structure, so it should still leave something in the ground. And when they decided to move for whatever reason, the film folks went, boy, that's a good big open space. Let's use it to make movies, and they bought it. The shirt factory itself moved down to Main Street. This is a photograph, I believe, of that second location. That's how it's labeled. I have nothing to think it's the first location. Unfortunately, I have no photographs of that early building. But these are the conditions that you're working in. They did say in the advertisements they're very generous. They pay for the thread. A lot of mills, you have to bring your own thread. This is the second location, easily recognizable, still down on Main Street. The old shirt factory, now going to be turned into a movie studio, was temporarily used as a school. Well, the new school was being constructed. They held classes in there for, looks like, a season and a half, maybe a year and a half. Another article about school opening. So here's our timeline on that building. 1890, the shirt factory is constructed. I don't know the exact year that they moved, but sometime around 1915 probably. It was used as a school from 1917 to 18. In 18, it was converted over to a movie studio. And this was a high-tech place. They had gantry cranes for lighting, cable systems to move lighting around, all the bells and whistles you could want to film a silent film indoors. And again, the investors are our same trio, including Charles Deary, our local theater owner. While they were not filming, it was a community space. It was called Studio Hall, and it was used for dances, for just gatherings, anything you could want to do in a big hall space. They would rent it out. American Legion Ball. Unfortunately, we lost that building to fire, as so often happened with the aforementioned nitrate films, but also this lighting equipment, which is hot and dangerous. Maybe it's, I don't know, it was a little strange to see that the fire started after the fireman's ball. A tragedy, really. It almost took out the Episcopal Church.
What was this building?
This building, are you familiar with Christchurch Episcopal, the wooden church, right next door?
Okay.
Yep. And so they actually removed the pews, they removed everything of value from the church because they knew the building was going to be a loss, especially considering what was in it for flammables. Mr. Deary's home was apparently next door. They cleared that out, and a few other local folks' homes. They emptied out the expensive furniture, expecting them to burn. Turns out they just lost the Studio Hall building and a dormitory for cast and crew that was attached. Lee House. They were the primary residence for folks coming into town to work on the films. And what a beautiful building. It is referred to at the time as the new Lee House. I don't know why. There was only one. Best guess is it underwent a management ownership change and they wanted to differentiate. But even Pearl, in her writings, writes of staying at the new Lee House. So gorgeous building, and it seems like they were very happy to have it full. I often see Lee House completely booked. Actors are having to stay in private homes because they're out of space.
Can you back up a little bit to more of those pictures?
I'm sorry?
Can you back up a little bit to more of those Lee House pictures?
Yeah, sure. So this is probably, what, 1930s, would guesstimate?
Yeah.
I think why they called it the new Lee House is they added that top story.
Is that it?
I believe
Okay,
that's what it
that could be it. They also had one of the world's very first Otis elevators in that building.
Yes.
So you can see it. That's the elevator tower right there. Not a chimney. That's the elevator.
Because it was originally just, well, you can see kind of where.
Yeah, you can see where they added that on. That's interesting. I'd like to see if I can find some paperwork about that. So it seems like at the Lee House, the master of ceremonies was this gentleman, James McNulty Sr. He is spoken of very glowingly. Everybody loved him. He seemed to be the host for all of these stars, cast and crew, and business folks coming into town for the movie industry. One more site, and this one was real new to me. Cheever, aka Pantheon Park, aka Millerton Park. I think everybody's probably familiar with the Cheever Ironworks, just north of town. Was its own town when it was an operating mining operation. Now they're still doing quarrying, stone quarrying and such out there. Charles Miller decided he wanted another location in town, and he was in talks to purchase that property with the intent to renovate 2 of the many dilapidated buildings and turn them into studios. As far as I can tell, it never happened. There were lots of talks about it, some documents signed, but it doesn't appear that they ever actually made the deal and started any work there.
What year?
We are in 21. 21, 22, that time. My guess would be they were sort of in talks. They thought things would keep growing here, and then it all shifted out west. So what are they doing? The films. We're actually going to make this the shortest part. Again, if you want to read the details of the films, we'll make all of this available. The real funny thing is, I've been studying this history for the past couple of weeks, and I haven't watched a single movie. Unfortunately, they're all gone.
Oh,
We have lost all of these silent films for a bunch of reasons. They burn, they spontaneously combust. There were a couple of very large archive fires. MGM lost a massive archive building, and they have been, as they do now, buying up little studios and films. So we lost a lot there. Library of Congress reckons that we only have about 14% of the silent film era remaining. Most of those, about half of those recovered films, have come from overseas because these films were distributed around the world. They saw a lot of international attention and were able to pick up some of those prints from different storage facilities in Europe and across the world. So, what are they doing? We're going to go through these pretty quick because I don't know a whole lot about them, unfortunately. I've gathered up whatever still images and information we can find. One film I really wish I had was called On the Back Lot from 1921. This was filmed 99%, we're told, right here in town, at the Witherby Blast Furnace, at the mines, all over the place. The film doesn't exist, and in fact there is no record of it beyond the newspaper clippings from here. It just doesn't exist in any of the film archives, not even the film itself, but the information about it seems to be gone. But we know what happened. We even know who was cast in it. But we don't know much about the film. Pantheon Films is Charles Miller's company. And it seems that they grabbed a local hotel operator, Benjamin Stetson, of the Deer's Head in to direct. Boy, I wish we had a movie. This is also an interesting one because this young lady, Anitha Getwell, was the winner of a contest, partly sponsored by Cecil B. DeMille, to find the next starlets. They narrowed it down to 5. They couldn't pick, so they picked all 5. They were probably their plan from the beginning because new talent. She comes up here. We know that she filmed the entirety of On the Back Lot. She was then on her way to New York City to start costume fittings for a next production, and she vanishes. Never to be heard from again as far as the historical record goes. Whether something happened to her or she just decided, this is crazy, this isn't for me, I'm going home, we don't know. This is the only piece of media from that film, short of the writing about it, and it's a still apparently from the set. The Inner Voice is another big picture that we found here, 1920. We know about it, again, mostly from the newspaper accounts, but also the posters. E.K. Lincoln was a fairly big male star back in this day, so this saw a very, very wide release. We're in 1920 here. We do have this description, so the studios were pretty good about, you gotta write up a business plan if you're gonna make a movie, right? So you write out a description. We don't really have scripts, but we do have some of these reviews generally and descriptions of the films. And a little Smoky. This was a film set out in the Smoky Mountains, but using the Adirondacks. We're in 1921. A lot of my research over the last couple of weeks has been taking a list of films that we thought were shot here about this length and condensing it by about half because of working titles. So this is a lot of going through who was the cast, who was the crew, how does it match up. In this case, this film started out being called Cross Currents, which I believe was a book or a play, and then was renamed. So boy, does that make figuring these things out interesting. But again, all we have are some posters, some still photographs from production, and a little bit of information about the storyline. These storylines were terrible. They were, these films were more akin to the pulp men's magazines of the day. Grand adventure, twists and turns. This is pre-code as well. This is pre-Hays Code, so there are no restrictions on what they can put on film. We tend to think of old movies as stodgy, dusty things with, people dancing and weird music. This was much more like modern media than what you would see in the mid-20th century because they didn't have any restrictions. And they were really working from that vaudeville style of entertainment. Give a little more body. An early one, Fathers of Men, same situation. We've got a couple of stills. I put that photograph in there specifically because that certainly looks like one of the buildings up at Arctic City. We've got a couple posters of it. Another still from production. That same still from production used in a promotional poster. Some really great Photoshop work. The Idol of the North, 21. Another big production. And filmed right here. Don't know much more about it. I feel like I'm not doing my job. There's just not much to know about these films, unfortunately. The Tiger's Cub, a little more information. You'll see this one written down very often as the Tiger's Cat. That's a typo from back in the day that's been carried forward, but we're in 1920. This is another pearl white feature. Really cool poster art. I love this poster. And some set photographs. And this one certainly does look like another interior location, possibly in that big building up at Arctic City. And take a look at the lights. I mean, this is a fake window. That's all lights, lights, lights. It's just, you have to just blast your actors. Very uncomfortable to work in. There is our pearl white up at Arctic City on set for this film. And a description of the film. Nice poster for that one. And there she is with a team of dogs posing. They don't look like they're ready to go anywhere, but she's posing on the dog sled, probably on her way, filled up with medication to keep Valley. I just blew that picture up so we could get a good look at that interior set. The Northland's Malice, this is a fun one. This is based on a play, eventually became a book as well, I believe, by Rex Beach, and he visited Fort Henry while it was in production to supervise his work being turned into a film. Now, this description has something interesting in it. Guth's store destroyed by fire. And again, going back to Joan's wonderful research materials, we find a photograph of folks preparing to burn Guth's store. And we also have another photograph that was much earlier that showed the sign with the store written on it. So here they're getting ready for what would be an early visual effects shot, I suppose, burning a building. And there it is going up in flames. Pretty cool that we have those shots. Because again, nothing left from the film. Law of the Yukon, this was a big one. This is, you'll see in the research a lot that it was based on Spell of the Yukon, a poem by Robert Service. It was not. It was based on another poem in this book called The Law of the Yukon. And all kinds of material about this one, posters, the stars, but again, no film. Interesting bit of info came from this movie, though. In its first year of release, it grossed $450,000. Gives you kind of an idea of the scale of these movie productions. They're paying local kids to be extras $5 a day, so they're making out okay. But these were not small for the time, not small, low-budget films. These were big deals. This, I think, is one of the reasons they wanted that studio hall, which is in operation at the time, but they're talking about having to wait for it to snow so that they can film the outside shots. And of course, keeping your entire cast and crew put up in the Lee House is really expensive. So I'd like to know what they netted on the film. Haven't found that number. This is during production of the same film. We have Pearl on this side. And we have, get my names right here, Wally Carr in the center, local gentleman, not sure exactly how he was connected to the production other than flirting with Pearl, and Florence Donahue, another local individual, I believe. Probably just, they're taking a selfie with the movie stars. And this is also, of course, a Charles Miller under Pantheon Productions film. And this was just one of those articles that mentions the Lee House being full for a long time. So, yeah, a lot of money coming into the community. One of the reasons or one of the excuses that the film companies eventually give for leaving town is they felt that the merchants were jacking up prices on them, and they didn't appreciate that. But I think on net, it was a positive for the community financially. And then eventually, people start to leave. Start to stand. The Danger Trail. I like this one. I don't know much more about it. In fact, I didn't know anything about it until I started looking into it because of this newspaper article. This talks about an actor, age, it's about 35, I believe, who unfortunately passed away out in front of the Windsor Hotel up in Westport. He was boarded at the Lee House. He was part of the production of the Danger Trail film, but there is not a scrap of evidence about that film other than this newspaper article. So, and it doesn't give his name. I've spent some time trying to, it tells about his career. It says what movie he was in, but it never mentions his name. I assume they were wiring family to let them know. So I've been trying to cross-reference with some of the stage work mentioned in here, but so far I haven't found somebody that matches that description. This is the book that The Danger Trail was based on. But again, even in the film archives and the lists of movies, we know it was made. We have posters for it. We know it was released. And we have one still photograph from the production. Don't know if that's our long-lost gentleman or not, but could be. Love, Adventure, and Triumph, another one I would love to film. Apparently that was a big movie back in the day. Song of the Wage Slave. These are the ones I just know nothing about. But I'm just going to put the titles up here. Lure of Heart's Desire, Dawn of a New Day, The Destroyers, The Law of the North. This may be a duplicate title to one of the other similar ones. I haven't found evidence to rule it out yet. Tangled Fates, and By Whose Hand, which is an early murder mystery apparently. The Snowbird. Why are we flashing? Under Northern Stars, The World's Great Snare. And then we get to our only existing media, The Perils of Pauline. So this is back to Pearl White, and these are shorts. And the reason we have these, my theory anyway, these shorts were tacked on to every film that went out, to every theater. So there's much more chance of them surviving rather than the entire film. So this is starting very early. This is 1914. There have been a whole series of remakes of these over the years, starting in 1914 and a couple of films up into the late 60s. So Perils of Pauline, this is what these remind me of, is these early men's pulp magazines. I had to look a while to find a mixed group appropriate cover because these things were, they were out there. But you can see that even that artwork mimicked in one of the posters for Perils of Pauline. This is where the trope of the damsel in distress tied to the railroad tracks comes from.
Ninth episode.
Yeah,
Ninth episode, it was kind of short, each different.
there were
movie.
20 of them.
Yeah.
Generally 2 real shorts, so about 20 to 30 minutes apiece. They were then recycled and reprinted, sent overseas. The existing copies we have are French prints that were then translated, the title cards translated back. They're in a real rough shape, but at least we have something. But I just love this artwork. She never was tied to railroad tracks, but that's where that trope comes from. And yeah, there she is in a pair of trousers, the scandal. Pearl White's character, although portrayed as a damsel in distress, she is a rich heiress whose parents have died. She has a fiance, and some evil men are trying to kill her to take her fortune. And they get into all sorts of misadventures. But her character reminds me a whole lot of Lucille Ball playing Lucy. Gets herself into all kinds of messes, but gets herself out of the messes too. She's not a shrinking violet. Just another still, which I think is probably an interior shot, possibly from Arctic City during the filming of Perils. And that's gotta be Arctic City. That is Pearl White and her co-star playing her fiance, no doubt being hunted for her fortune. And, so where does that take us in the modern age? Modern being the talkies, the movies with sound. This is gonna be another talk. A gentleman named Tom Tyler is born here in Port Henry. He would come of age as the talkies are becoming popular, and he would become quite the movie star, starring in all kinds of westerns. He would be the first to play the Mummy on film. He would also play a version of a Captain Marvel superhero type, and he would be the first to portray the Phantom on film as well. So what's coming up next? What are we going to get out of this whole project? Well, these are the list of films that I am now quite confident were filmed here in Port Henry. So I'm building out a spreadsheet where we're gathering all the information that I can about these films into one central location. Names, titles, alternate titles, cast and crew, and all that fun stuff. So if you know of any others, please send them my way. And that's not all. There's always another story. Last night, as I'm putting the finishing touches on this talk, I learned about the lost girl dog driver is found. Whistling Lou Hutchinson, the Idaho girl who was driving a dog team, we'll typo there, to Montreal. Got some good advertising Thursday when it was reported that she and her dogs were lost between Elizabethtown and Plattsburgh. She left Port Henry Monday night, and when she did not show up in Plattsburgh the next morning, an alarm was sent out and search for her began. So this is an entire new character. Charles Miller's dogs, the dogs from Arctic City, doing some type of a publicity run by dog sled. Don't know anything else about this person, so we gotta look into that.
So she really did disappear?
I don't know. No, I think if I continue reading, she was fine. She made it to Rouse's Point eventually. But who is this person? Who is this new media figure? These are the YouTube influencers of their day. I want to know more about Whistling Lou Hutchinson. And was there any
dogs?
And the dogs, the poor dogs. But also, was there any connection to the other Hutchinson, who was another film star who worked mostly in Saranac Lake doing stunts? He was early stuntman.
In Montreal and drive to her home in Idaho. I just can't imagine those poor dogs going that far.
They can do it. Whether Whistling Lou could do it or not, I don't know. Very, very interesting times and a very interesting little bit of history to research and try to put it all together.
Thank you very much.
And please, if I made any mistakes, let me know too, because this stuff is kind of mixed up and convoluted, but if you have any more information, family stories, I would love to add those to the record, but keep it as well. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.